Hello, this is Sam Gerrans from samgerrans.com. Today is Thursday, November 16th, 2023, and today the subject is the Catholic Church bending over for the agenda. Now, in this part of my presentation, what I'm doing is looking at propaganda, and it's quite easy to spot, as I've mentioned before, because pretty much, well, in fact, everything that comes out of government, mainstream media, even not mainstream media, films, music, education system, you name it, it's all propaganda, pretty much, either intentionally or it's simply repeating previous propaganda. What we're going to do is look at an article from the Guardian, and it doesn't matter. You may say, oh, well, you're picking on the Guardian. It doesn't make any difference. It's the same tosh everywhere you go. The reason why I got this one from the Guardian is the Guardian's free. There's no paywall. Why people pay to have their minds spun up by this tosh, I don't know. I'm certainly not going to pay for it. They should pay me to read it. Anyway, what we'll do is we'll look at this together. I haven't read it. I can't stand reading it once. I'm sure I'm not going to read it twice. I don't know what it's going to say, but I can take a fairly good guess. And we'll look at it together, mock it somewhat. And the point of this is not just because mocking this type of low-grade propaganda. It's a bit like shooting fish in a barrel. The point of it isn't simply to mock it. The point of it is to invite people to do this for themselves. Because the difference that I noticed growing up in the West, and then I moved and had spent a lot of my younger years in Russia and learnt Russian and so on. And the first time that I went to Russia or came to Russia was still during the Soviet period. And the difference I noticed between then Soviet citizens and the Western free citizens in the West was that the Soviets had I'm talking about educated, intelligent people. They were completely dismissive of propaganda. And there was a current joke then, which basically there were two main newspapers. There was Pravda, which means truth, and Izvestia, which means news. And the joke was there's no truth in the news and there's no news in the truth. They got it. The other big difference was in those days was that in the Russian household, sure, everyone may keep their mouths shut and be in favor of whatever the agenda was at work, but at home there was a completely different conversation. It was called the kitchen conversation. Everybody knew it was nonsense, and I think that this may be changing a bit in the West, but when I grew up there was no other conversation, especially amongst those people who consider themselves to be, well informed and all of that. I found them to be completely. It was impossible to pierce their armor of indoctrination with anything which didn't fit in with what they'd already got. I think that's changing a bit. I don't know that it's going to make a lot. Well, I don't think it will make any difference whatsoever. But there we are. Anyway, we'll look at this together, see how much of it we can stand. All I know is its title, and I know that it's short, and we'll see how we do with it. So here we are. Trans people can be baptized in church and be godparents, says Vatican. Vatican office adds that there must be no, quote, situations in which there is a risk of generating a public scandal. What? By letting, sexual deviance into the church. Let's put it this way. If you've got no legs and you don't want to play football, you've got no business being in a football team, right? What you'll notice about the whole so-called liberal agenda is that no matter what the delusion, solipsistic indoctrination or new identity that's been dreamt up, it never excludes them from anything. You may have noticed this. I've seen it all my life. I've seen women insinuated into every single area of male provenance. There is now nowhere precisely nowhere that you can go to get away from these creatures. They're in everything. They just interfere with absolutely everything. It doesn't matter what it is. They'll now tell you. I mean, I don't follow sport myself, but I do know that in the West, you have to sit there. With these sports events. Just as an example, sports commentators. You have men who. Usually they're ex-footballers who've given their entire life and career to playing football and know something about the game, having to sit there and pretending not to yawn while you've got some woman who can't play, explaining to them how it all should be done better. This is just one example. It's in absolutely everything. But, okay, let's say that one is, delusional or a deviant or afflicted, if you want to use that word, with this unfortunate psychological and sexual, way of looking at the world. All right. Well, then the answer should be, well, then you can't join the Catholic Church because, if you're a homosexual and dressing up in, the clothes which do not pertain to your actual gender, or, you've been convinced to think, and the society's colluding with you to pretend that you're a man when you're a woman, or vice versa. There is only one answer, and that answer is you can't join the Catholic Church. That should be the answer. I'm not a Catholic, but that's the only sensible answer. But that's not going to be acceptable. There's always going to be a workaround. That's the way it works. I'm sure that's what's going to happen. Anyway, let's see. The Vatican's doctrinal office has said that transgender people, and I just stop, from a point of view of indoctrination and propaganda, there is no such thing as a transgender person. It's like saying that there is an odd even number. It's actually a self excluding definition. It doesn't exist. But they want you to use this language because as you start to use the language, it starts to lose its natural impact upon you. Has said that transgender people can, under certain circumstances, be baptized into the Catholic Church and serve as godparents in a statement that has been hailed as, quote, a major step for trans inclusion. Just on a point of principle, to be godparent, it means that you will be responsible for the religious education of the child in the event that the child's parents die. Okay? How competent could people who are, by virtue of their dominant identity, excluded from being members of this church, properly speaking, how are they in any way qualified to do that? Well, they're not, of course. But if you say this, you're just nasty. In a document approved last month by Pope Francis, who's a Jesuit and a Marxist, in my opinion, and published on Wednesday, the office noted that a transgender person, quote, even if they have undergone hormone therapy and sex reassignment surgery, can receive baptism under the conditions as other faithful. Just stop it there before we get into the doctrinal delusion of all this. A very interesting point that was clear to me from reading Ayn Rand's books, The Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged. I don't really rate her as a philosopher, or actually much as a novelist, but she had a few very good ideas which she was able to get to convey through the novel. And one of the key takeaways is the way that this works, the way that collectivism works. And obviously she's talking about a different type of collectivism in her work, but it's completely comparable to what's going on today, is they leverage your virtue. You see, if you're not kind and good, it doesn't work. That's their greatest power over you. A bit like when it comes to propaganda, the greatest weapon in their arsenal is your incredulity. You can't believe that other people would lie as expertly as this, and that they would tell such barefaced lies. You don't believe it because you wouldn't do it. Well, that's a big mistake. In a document approved last month by Pope Francis and published on blah, blah, blah. Oh, yes. The office noted that a transgender person, as I've said, there is no such thing, actually, as a transgender person. It doesn't exist. Not objectively. I mean, you can bully people into pretending that it does, but it doesn't. This isn't, again, me being horrible. It's just there's no such thing as an odd even number. It doesn't exist. It's either even or it's not. And whatever it is what it is. So, you may not like it. You may be a 2 and wish you were a 3. And you may, walk around with a gun and get everybody to pretend that you are a 3. But you're not. You're a 2. That's just a fact. Under the condition as other faithful. So what is it then that you believe if you are a Catholic? Well, post-Vatican II, pretty much nothing, unfortunately. And I have certainly, historically, I have a lot of respect for the Catholic Church, and they do make some sense. I mean, they don't make, convincing sense to me, but they do make some sense, and I have a lot of respect for some Catholics. I do think it is still, or was, a valid tradition in which it was possible to approach God. I don't think that's possible now, and I think a lot of the Catholics agree. They're basically trying, as far as I can see, to maintain Catholicism without the Catholic Church. The decision came with a caveat. Such baptisms were possible, it said, quote, if there are no situations in which there is a risk of generating a public scandal or confusion amongst the faithful. Well, that doesn't mean anything, does it? People can always be confused. And I think if you know anything about the Bible, then clearly this is something that you shouldn't be allowed to do. What they're afraid of is basically more bad news. The document was published as a response to 6 questions sent in by a Brazilian bishop in July regarding the participation of highly delusional people in baptisms and weddings. Participation. It makes it sound as if they're sort of, joining at the edges and sort of clapping along while it happens to other people. No, they mean being baptized into the church and married. These are delusional concepts. I'm not being horrible about people who, I feel sorry for people who suffer in this way. I'll be honest with you. I think it's very sad. But everyone pretending that this isn't a deviancy or some sort of affliction is not helping matters. It really isn't, and it just dilutes whatever integrity was left, and that's really what's going on here, chipping away at the last vestiges of Western culture, Western civilization, and what they've got to replace it with is going to be a complete tyranny and absolute hell. It noted that transgender adults, again, they keep using this word, but there is no such thing as transgender, could serve as godfathers or godmothers. Well, you're lost right there. I mean, are you a godfather or a godmother? Are you what you actually are, or are you what you have deluded yourself into thinking that you are and want to force other people to collude with you? So which is it? It's all about confusion. They're masters of confusion. That's what this is. At the discretion of local priests who should exercise quote-unquote pastoral prudence to ensure that there is, quote, no risk of scandal. Well, if they were actually going to exercise pastoral prudence, they'd throw this into the fire and say we're not touching this because it's antithetical to the book which we hold to as our foundational scripture. The end. No risk of scandal, well, that's what they care about. Or, quote, undue legitimization in the educational sphere of the church community. So basically, they're just afraid of being criticized. Doesn't really fit with the some of the obvious assertions of the man they claim to follow. The document also noted that there was no reason transgender people could not serve as witnesses at church weddings. You see, so this is how they're going to do it. What they're doing is they're basically saying there's no difference between a man and a woman if enough people agree. This is humanism. It's a sort of humanistic fascism. The fact that God made you into a man or a woman, that's irrelevant now. And they're getting the church, the Vatican, to agree with this. The pronouncement, which appears to reverse a 2015 ruling, stood in sharp contrast to the dozens of dioceses in the US that have put in place policies to restrict LGBTQ plus Catholics, said Francis de Bernardo of the US-based New Ways Ministry. Quote, "It is big and good news, De Bernardo, whose ministry has long pushed for greater acceptance in the church, told Associated Press. It's a major step for trans inclusion." You see the type of language that they're using. What is it they say? Greater acceptance. Well, acceptance must be great. What about paedophilia? Don't you accept that yet? This is just one step away. It's coming. And I've been saying this for years. It's definitely coming. I mean, what do you think your children are being indoctrinated into in schools now? They're certainly not learning to do, long division or calculus or anything that might serve them to be, in any useful capacity in life. No, they're being indoctrinated into sexual perversions. And they are perversions. I mean, let's just look at Sodom and Gomorrah. If you're going to say that God destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah because of what they were doing, how is this any different? Really? I mean, really? Or just say you don't believe it. And that's what they want. This is just a way of undermining the church. He described it as confirmation that the Pope and high-ranking church leaders do not see gender identity. Here's another word, gender identity. I mean, if I'm 56, I could just say, well, I identify as a 4-year-old. Or whatever. Why is that not true? It's not true because it's objectively not true. But your gender identity, you can be as delusional as you like, but I'm not going to agree with you. But your identity, this is something which apparently we all have to accept. Leave that to one side. What about the book which Catholics say they believe? How does it fit in with that? Well, it doesn't in any case, or what the church fathers would have said. You wouldn't have. I mean, I challenge you to find me a church father who would go along with this. I bet you're just not going to find one. Trans inclusion. He described it as a confirmation that the Pope and high-ranking church leaders do not see gender identity as a de facto barrier when it comes to participation in Catholic sacraments. We hope that church leaders will apply these guidelines by following Pope Francis' example of extravagant welcome. I'd say of extravagant lack of responsibility for the office that he holds, rather than using them to continue old restrictions, he said in a statement. See, it's old, so it's bad and wrong. You won't notice this, but this is the language. Inclusion's good, that's all great. Acceptance is good. But in this case, what's the word they used? Old restrictions. Old must be bad. The LGBTQ advocacy group, these people are pushing for your children, and it sounds like I'm making it up. I wish I were. You can find groups singing, gloriously. What's the word they used? Extravagant. Yes, extravagantly on YouTube. That they're coming for your children. They're not hiding it. They don't reproduce. Where do you think they're going to get? Lunch. Blah de blah de blah. Pope Francis is continuing to break down barriers that have kept LGBTQ Catholics away from full participation as members of the Roman Catholic Church, and is instead calling on global leaders to create welcoming spaces for LGBTQ people, said GLAAD's Kate Ellis in a statement. So if you don't want this, well then what are you? You're a bigot. Just going back to Ayn Rand, she really got this right. This is how they make it happen. They're using your virtue against you, but also your cowardice. You don't want to come out and say it as it is. You think that probably if you keep your mouth shut long enough, they'll stop. No, they won't. Satan never stops. He always continues. And the way it works is when you've accepted it, and you keep accepting it, you keep rolling over it, as you have done for the last 100 years. I mean, everything that they've done to you, he'll turn around and he'll say, I am quit of thee. He'll deny any association with you, and it'll be your fault. Your fault. And silence connotes consent. That's the way it works in law. In July, the Vatican released comments made by the Pope during, in fact, they've got Pope with a lowercase p here. Just checking back, have they done it? Pope Francis as a title. I see. Okay. But I think normally you'd have President with an uppercase. Made by the Pope during an interaction with an Italian in their early 20s who said they were torn between the Catholic faith. I see. Okay, here we are. The problem. And transgender identity. Yeah, well, you should be torn by it. It means that you have to choose. It's an either or. You can have one or the other. You can either, fight your way through it and deny yourself whatever these inclinations are and become a member of the Catholic Church, or go and live in San Francisco and not be one. But people don't want that. They want both. But there are just some clubs you can't join. Try getting into a Jewish school or a Japanese school or something like this. You're just not qualified because you're not a member of that group. Well, these people are not members of the Catholic Church. They shouldn't be. Or they should they should have exercise discipline over whatever, proclivities that they have and be members of the Catholic Church. But you can't do both. But that's not inclusive. Well, that's right. It's not inclusive. This is an exclusive club. Francis replied, "The Lord always walks with us, even if we are sinners." Is that true? He draws near to help us. The Lord loves us as we are. This is God's crazy love. God loves us as we are. I think you'd find slim pickings in terms of biblical support for that, and certainly a ton of stuff which would go against that. Certainly, God, it is God's grace and all the rest of it. But, you have to leave the field of Satan if you're going to then go and, plough the furrow in the fields of God. You can't do both. You're either of this world or you're not. And it's as simple as that. Months later, he suggested that there could be ways to bless same-sex unions, though he reiterated his belief that matrimony is a union between a man and a woman. It's not a belief, it's a fact. And in terms of the Bible, it's unassailably so. It's not his, but that in this case, when the Pope believes something, then you have to accept it. But now it's just his belief. It's just, and because you don't really believe anything, not so far as it's going to impact your actual actions, you relegate it to something you might say but not actually act upon. The document published on Wednesday, however, was vague in its response to whether a same-sex couple could baptize and adopt his child. Here you go. If our parents, our grandparents, our great-grandparents would have risen up and burnt down the Parliament buildings. But you're just going to sit here and just let this happen. Catholics going to sit, just let this happen. They're afraid of being, it's their virtue or their perceived virtue that keeps them in place. They don't want to be seen as being evil or in any way bad. You see how this, upside down this world really is. This is the Catholic Church. Same-sex couple could baptize an adopted child, God help us, or a child born via a surrogate, saying that there had to be, quote, a well-founded hope that the child would be educated in the Catholic religion. Well, how are you going to be educated in the Catholic religion if you're living with two men who are buggering each other in, hopefully not in front of you? It offered a similarly nuanced response. It's a nuanced response, you see, that's what it is. It's not like there's doctrine. There's nothing that you actually have to believe. It's not like there's an either or. I thought it was, but narrow is the gate. And that which leads unto eternal life, and few there be that go in thereby. That's the Catholic doctrine. But no, it's all inclusive. You have to inclusive. But I thought the inclusive way was the broad path, the broad way, which leads to hell. Perhaps that's where they're leading you now. Seems they're already there. He offered a similarly nuanced response when it came to the question of whether a person in a same-sex relationship could serve as a godparent, God help us, noting that the person had to, quote, lead a life that conforms to the faith, end quote. But they can't lead a life that conforms to the faith. Not if they're buggering each other. You see, it doesn't work. They're excluded by definition. Still, the document was warmly welcomed by those who have long advocated for the rights of LGBTQ. They have rights, but you don't. Your family, you don't have rights. You don't have rights. You joined the club as if you were a Catholic, or your parents did at some point. And that wasn't part of the agreement. But this club, just imagine it was a golf club. And you joined this club, and you had certain, you weren't allowed to let stray dogs or whatever it is, other people, whatever it is, into that club. But now these people can come in. But it's only fair that everybody's included. But in certain areas, like religion. But as I say, try joining certain schools or certain other clubs. You won't be allowed to join those. But the Catholic Church, sure, can do what you like. Advocated for the rights of LGBTQ. Just so you know, I'm just going to say this. I have said this before. This is Marxism. This is Marxism 2.0. They tried Marxism 1.0, and it was all geared toward the working classes. But if you've probably noticed that all the working classes' jobs are pretty much going away or being outsourced to machines. And so the new Marxism is identity politics, i.e. delusion, and they're using this to destroy civilization. That's what's going on. Quote, this is an important step forward. Progress, you see, in the church, seeing transgender, which doesn't exist, people not only as people in a church where some say they don't really exist, well, they don't, but as Catholics. Father James Martin, a prominent Jesuit priest, wrote on social media. Well, I think we all know where this is going. What this is a kind of greasing the skids so that you just feel that it's something that you kind of expected. This one piece isn't going to change the world, but they're getting you ready for it. Yes, you are living through total degeneracy. There isn't much you can really do about it except try to be a healthy cell within a cancerous body. In my view, for what it's worth, there's no stopping this, unfortunately. But I won't get into that subject now. I will link to this on my YouTube down below. I'm sure, people say, oh, Sam Gerrans, he's horrible about transgender people. I'm not horrible. I'm sorry if you are delusional. I'm sorry if if you have a certain type of psychological sickness. I genuinely am sorry for you. My own view is, personally, keep it at home and just, live quietly and don't spread it around. That would be my advice. And within that context, my thought is that you should be inviolate. You should be able to, do whatever you want at home. It's between you and God, frankly, and it's not should be none of my business, personally. But what's happening is the politicization of deviancy and delusion. And that's where it becomes a public matter. That's where it becomes other people's concern. And the Catholic Church, I'm just trying to point out, is really being used to normalize this, when one would hope that the Catholic Church would stand up and call this out for what it is. And if this is the moral leadership of the Catholic Church, what's left? Nothing, as far as I can see. Anyway, on that happy note, we'll wrap this up. Details of where I upload to, how you can join my Substack and Telegram channel, support my work, and download my books free are in the description. Thanks for listening, and bye for now.